My name is Vivienne Caldwell, and despite everything I've achieved, I was never good enough for my family. But that night at Portland International Airport, everything changed. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away from someone who refused to see your worth. Growing up in Bend, Oregon, I learned early that love in the Caldwell family came with conditions. My father, Harrison Caldwell, built his fortune in timber and real estate, turning our small mountain town connections into a multi-million-dollar empire. To him, success wasn't just about money. It was about image, legacy, and most importantly, control. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother Marcus, the heir apparent who could do no wrong, and my younger sister Delilah, the baby who could do no harm. While Marcus partied his way through college on Dad's dime and Delilah pursued her artistic dreams with a blank check, I clawed my way through Stanford Law and landed a position at Cascade Strategic Partners, one of Portland's most prestigious investment firms. By 32, I was pulling in 7 figures annually, managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions. I'd purchased a penthouse overlooking the Willamette River, drove a Tesla Model S Plaid, and had been featured in Forbes 30 Under 33 years running. But none of that mattered to Harrison Caldwell, in his eyes. I was still the stubborn middle child who thought she was too good for the family business. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I built my career from scratch, Marcus had run Dad's company into near bankruptcy twice, and Delilah had blown through a trust fund that could have bought a small island. Yet somehow I remained the disappointment. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Mom's voice was strained. Careful. Vivienne, honey, your father wants the whole family together for Thanksgiving this year. It's been too long since we've all been in one place. I should have known something was up. The Caldwells weren't exactly the Norman Rockwell type. Our family gatherings typically involved passive-aggressive comments, too much wine, and someone storming out before dessert. Where? I asked, already dreading the answer. The lodge in Sun River. Your father's rented the entire Mountain View villa for the weekend. All the cousins, aunts, uncles, the whole family. He says it's important. Sun River, of course, Dad's favorite. Power play location, where he could hold court in a 10,000 square foot vacation rental that cost more per night than most people made in a month. I'll need to check my schedule, I said automatically. Vivienne, Mom's voice carried that familiar warning tone. Your father specifically asked for you. Please don't make this difficult. That should have been my first red flag. Harrison Caldwell didn't ask for anything. He commanded it. But I was tired of being the family outsider, tired of being treated like an ungrateful child when I was the only one who'd actually made something of myself. Fine, I said. I'll be there, if I was going to play the dutiful daughter one more time. I was going to do it right. I spent weeks planning what I thought would be the perfect gesture. Something that would finally show my family that I wasn't just successful, I was thoughtful, generous, and despite everything, I still cared about them. Through my connections, at Cascade, I arranged to purchase a 1967 Shelby GT500, fully restored in pristine condition. It wasn't just any classic car, it was identical to the one Dad had owned in college, the one he'd sold to help start his first business, the one he'd mentioned with regret countless times over the years. The car cost me $180,000. I had it delivered to a specialized transport company that would bring it to Sun River on Thanksgiving morning, complete with a custom car cover embroidered with "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad" and our family crest. I also arranged for a professional photographer to capture the moment when Dad saw it, thinking it would be a memory we'd all treasure. God, I was naive. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and drizzly. Typical Oregon weather that matched my growing unease. I drove my Tesla up to Sun River, the winding road through the Cascade Mountains usually a source of peace for me. Today it felt like driving toward a storm. The Mountain View villa was exactly as ostentatious as I'd expected. Stone and timber construction, floor-to-ceiling windows, enough bedrooms to house a small village. Dad's Range Rover was already in. The circular driveway, along with Marcus's lifted pickup truck and Delilah's bright yellow Jeep Wrangler. I was barely out of my car when Delilah came bounding out of the lodge, all bouncing curls and artificial enthusiasm. Vivi! Oh my God, you actually came. Dad said you probably wouldn't show up. Why wouldn't I show up? I asked, Though I already knew the answer, I'd missed the last two family gatherings due to work commitments, a client emergency and a merger that couldn't wait. Apparently, I'd been branded unreliable. You know, Dad, Delilah said with a shrug that didn't hide the edge in her voice. He says you care more about your fancy job than your family. I bit back my response. I'd learned long ago that defending myself to Delilah was pointless. She lived in a world where Dad's approval came easy, where money flowed freely, where consequences were for other people. Inside, the lodge was warming with family members I saw maybe once a year. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all gravitating toward Dad like he was the sun and they were planets in his orbit. He stood by the massive stone fireplace, holding court with a tumbler of expensive scotch, regaling everyone with stories of his latest business victories. "Vivienne," he said when he spotted me, his voice carrying across the room. "You made it." I was starting to think Cascade Strategic couldn't spare you for one weekend. The room went quiet. This was how it always started, a public dig disguised as paternal concern. "I wouldn't miss it, Dad," I said, forcing a smile. "Actually, I have something special planned for today." His eyebrows raised slightly. "Oh? Don't tell me you bought us another one of those expensive gift baskets from that fancy Portland shop." More chuckles from the family. Last Christmas, I'd sent a curated selection of Oregon wines and artisanal foods that had cost me $500, Dad. Had made jokes about it for months, calling it yuppie food for people with more money than sense. "Something a little more personal this time," I said. Thanksgiving dinner was the usual Caldwell production. Catered food that cost more than most people's monthly rent, served on china that hadn't been used since the last family gathering. Conversation flowed around me. Marcus talking about his latest get-rich-quick scheme, Delilah gushing about her new boyfriend who was totally going to make it as an influencer, various relatives discussing their vacations and purchases and social drama. I sat quietly, picking at my meal, checking my phone periodically for updates from the transport company. The Shelby was scheduled to arrive at 3 o'clock. Right after dessert, perfect timing. "You're quiet today, Vivi," said my Aunt Margaret, Dad's sister, who'd always been one of my few family allies. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I said. "Big week at work." "Always working," said my cousin Brad. "Marcus's age and equally useless. Don't you ever just live a little?" I could have told them about the charity gala I'd attended last weekend, or the wine tasting in Yamhill Valley, or the weekend I'd spent in San Francisco just because I could. But in the Caldwell family, any mention of my lifestyle was seen as bragging. "I'm living plenty," I said simply. At exactly 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed. The transport truck was pulling up the driveway. "Actually," I said, standing up and raising my wine glass, "before dessert, I have something for Dad." The room fell silent. Dad looked skeptical, like he was bracing himself for embarrassment. "Vivienne, you didn't need to—" Mom started. "I wanted to," I said firmly. "Dad, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye on everything. I know you think I'm too focused on work, too disconnected from the family, but the truth is, everything I've achieved, I've done because you taught me that success matters. You showed me what it means to build something from nothing." Dad's expression softened slightly. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of pride. "So I wanted to give you something that represents both where you came from and where you've taken. This family, something that shows I've been listening all these years." I walked to the window and pointed outside, where the transport truck was just lowering its ramp. "I know you've regretted selling your '67 Shelby GT500 to start the business. I know you've talked about that car every year since I was little, so I found you another one, exactly like yours, fully restored, perfect condition." The room erupted. In gasps and excited chatter as everyone rushed to the windows, the transport team was carefully rolling the covered car down the ramp, positioning it in the driveway like a work of art. Dad's face was unreadable. He walked slowly to the window, the rest of the family trailing behind him like an entourage. "You bought me a car?" he said quietly. "Not just any car. Your car. The one you've missed for 30 years. We all filed outside, the November air crisp and sharp. The transport team had positioned the Shelby perfectly, the custom car cover gleaming in the afternoon light. "Would you like to do the honors?" I asked Dad, gesturing to the cover for a moment. He looked almost vulnerable. Then his businessman's mask slipped back into place. "This must have cost you a fortune," he said. "That's not important." What's important is that you know how much I appreciate everything you've done for this family." Dad walked slowly around the covered car, his hand trailing along the edge of the tarp. The family watched in hushed anticipation. The photographer I'd hired was discreetly capturing every moment. Finally, Dad gripped the edge of the cover and pulled. The 1967 Shelby GT500 gleamed in the afternoon light, its midnight blue paint flawless, its chrome bumpers mirror bright. It was absolutely perfect for about 10 seconds. "It's beautiful, Vivienne," Dad said, his voice carefully neutral. "Absolutely beautiful." He walked around the car slowly, running his fingers along the hood, peering through the windows at the restored interior. The family crowded around, everyone talking at once about what an incredible gift it was. Then Dad stopped at the driver's side door and looked at me directly. "There's just one problem," he said. My stomach dropped. "Problem?" "Well, two problems, actually." His voice was getting louder, carrying that familiar edge that meant trouble was coming. "First, my old Shelby was a 68. Not a 67, I've only mentioned it about 100 times over the years." My heart started pounding. I'd been so careful with the research, so certain I'd gotten every detail right. "But that's not the real problem," Dad continued, his voice now loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "The real problem is that I already have a classic car, had it for 3 years now, a 68 Shelby GT500, just like my original. Found it myself, bought it myself, restored it myself." The family fell silent. I felt the blood draining from my face. "You see, Vivienne, if you actually spent time with your family instead of hiding behind that fancy job, you'd know these things. You'd know that I bought the car 2 years ago. You'd know that it's sitting in the garage at home right now. You'd know that I've been working on it every weekend, that it's my favorite hobby, that I've shown pictures to everyone here at least a dozen times." I looked around at the faces of my family. Aunt Margaret looked sympathetic but uncomfortable. Marcus was smirking. Delilah had her phone out, probably recording my humiliation for social media. "But here's what really bothers me," Dad said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that every Caldwell child knew meant you were about to get destroyed. "You spent, what, $200,000 on a car I don't need, for a hobby you don't understand, to solve a problem that doesn't exist, all because you can't be bothered to actually know your own family. Dad, no." He held up his hand. "You want to know what I think this is really about? I think this is about you trying to buy your way back into the family good graces. I think you're feeling guilty about missing Christmas last year and Easter and Mom's birthday, so you thought you could write a big check and make it all go away. Photographer was still taking pictures. I could hear the camera clicking like a countdown timer. "That's not," I started. "You know what would have meant something to me?" Dad's voice was rising again. "Your time, your attention, a phone call once in a while that wasn't about you needing something, maybe showing up for Sunday dinner occasionally instead of always being too busy with your important career. I work hard to what? Prove that you're better than us? We get it, Vivienne. You're successful. You make more money than the rest of us combined. You live in your fancy penthouse and drive your fancy car and wear your fancy clothes. But success without family is just emptiness with a better address." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there in the driveway, next to a $180,000 mistake, feeling like I was 12 years old again and getting lectured for not living up to Dad's expectations. "So here's what's going to happen," Dad said finally. "You're going to call whoever you bought this from and return it. I don't want it. I don't need it. And I don't want a daughter who thinks she can buy her way out of being a disappointment." That last word hit like a physical blow. Disappointment after everything I'd achieved. Everything I'd built. I was still a disappointment. The family started to disperse. The excitement deflated. Everyone suddenly very interested in going back inside for dessert. I stood frozen next to the Shelby, my perfect gift now feeling like evidence of my failure to understand my own family. "Vivi," Marcus said, walking up and putting a condescending hand on my shoulder. "Don't take it so hard. Dad's just trying to teach you something." "What exactly is he trying to teach me?" I asked, my voice barely controlled. "That money isn't everything. That family comes first. Basic stuff, really." I stared at him. Marcus, who'd borrowed $50,000 from Dad just last month to cover gambling debts. Marcus, who'd never held a job for more than 18 months, who'd been living off family money his entire adult life. "You're right," I said quietly. "Family should come first." Marcus smiled, thinking he'd gotten through to me. "Exactly. Now come on. Let's go have some pie and forget about all this." I followed him back toward the lodge, but stopped at the front door. "Actually, Marcus, I need to make a phone call first. Give me just a minute." "Sure thing. I'll save you a piece of Mom's pumpkin pie." As soon as he was inside, I pulled out my phone and called my assistant. "Rebecca? It's Vivienne. I need you to book me on the first flight back to Portland tonight. No, not commercial. Call NetJets. I want a private jet." "Yes, I know. It's Thanksgiving. I'll pay whatever premium they want. And Rebecca? Cancel the return on the Shelby. I have a better idea." I walked back into the lodge with my phone in my hand, every eye in the room tracking my movement. Dad was holding court again, probably explaining to everyone how he'd just taught his ungrateful daughter an important lesson about family values. "Dad," I said, interrupting his story, "I have something to tell everyone." He looked annoyed at being interrupted. "What now, Vivienne?" "Well, first, you were right about one thing. I should know my family better, so I did some research this week." I pulled up the documents on my phone that I'd had Rebecca prepare, originally for a different purpose entirely. For instance, I should have known that you've been borrowing against the company to cover personal expenses, $2.3 million over the past 2 years, to be exact. Dad's face went white. The room fell silent. I should have known that Marcus's gambling problem cost the EI. "Family business, its line of credit with First National Bank." "Vivienne," Dad said quietly, "you need to stop. I should have known that Mom's been covering the mortgage payments on this lodge rental with money from her inheritance because the company can't afford it anymore." Mom gasped audibly. Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "But most importantly," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "I should have known that 3 months ago you approached Cascade Strategic Partners about a potential investment in Caldwell Holdings. You wanted us to bail out the family business." Dad, I was gripping his scotch glass so hard his knuckles were white. "You met with my boss, Harrison, did you know that? You sat in his office and pitched him on why Cascade should invest in your timber operation. You brought financial statements, projections, the whole presentation." "That's enough," Dad said. "Do you know what he told you?" "He said the company was too risky, too leveraged, too dependent on one man's ego to be a sound investment. But he also said something else." I paused, looking around the room at my family's shocked faces. "He said that if I vouched for you personally, if I put my reputation on the line, he'd consider it. All you had to do was ask your daughter, the one who works there, the one who's never missed a payment or defaulted on a loan or borrowed money she couldn't pay back, to put in a good word." The silence was deafening. "But you never asked me, did you, Dad? You never even mentioned that you'd been to my office. Instead, you spent 3 months telling everyone who'd listen that I cared more about work than family. You spent 3 months making me feel guilty for being successful while you were secretly hoping I'd bail out your failing business." Dad's face had gone from white to red. "You don't understand the pressures." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I understand that when Marcus needed money, you gave it to him. When Delilah needed money, you gave it to her. But when you needed money, you were too proud to ask your disappointment daughter for help." I looked around the room one more time, at the faces of people who'd spent years making me feel like I wasn't good enough, wasn't family-oriented enough, wasn't humble enough. "You want to know what would have meant something to me?" I said, echoing Dad's earlier words. "An apology for all the times you made me feel small for being successful, for all the family events where you introduced Marcus as my son, the entrepreneur, and Delilah as my daughter, the artist, and me as just Vivienne, for 32 years of making me feel like I had to choose between your approval and my ambitions." I walked to the window and looked out at the Shelby, still gleaming in the driveway. "You're right about one thing, Dad. I can't buy my way back into this family's good graces, but that's because I was never really in them to begin with." I turned back to face the room. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm keeping the car. Not because I need it, but because it's a perfect reminder of this moment. The moment I realized that family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. It's about respect and support and love, and those are things you can't demand. They have to be earned." I picked up my purse and keys from the entry table. "Where are you going?" Mom asked, her voice small. "Home. I have a flight to catch. "Vivienne, please," she said. "Let's talk about this tomorrow when everyone's calmed down." "There's nothing to talk about, Mom. I'm done trying to earn my place at this table. I'm done apologizing for being successful. I'm done pretending that this is what family is supposed to feel like." Dad finally found his voice. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to welcome you back." I smiled for the first time all day. "Dad, I've been walking through that door my whole life, hoping you'd welcome me back. Today's the first time I'm not planning to turn around." The drive to Portland International Airport should have been heartbreaking. I should have been crying, should have been second-guessing my decision, should have been planning how to apologize and make things right. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. I called Rebecca from the car. "The jet's ready at PDX," she said. "But Vivienne, are you sure about this?" "It's Thanksgiving." "I'm sure," I said. "And Rebecca?" "Tomorrow I want you to set up a meeting with Harrison. I have some ideas about the Caldwell Holdings situation." "I thought you said your father wasn't interested in family business mixing with Cascade business." "He's not. But that doesn't mean I can't make my own decision about whether the company is worth saving, just not with him running it." When I arrived at Portland International, the NetJets representative was waiting for me at the private terminal. No lines, no security hassles, no dealing with holiday crowds. Just straight from my car to a luxury jet that would have me back in Portland in 30 minutes. As we taxied toward the runway, I looked out the window at the commercial terminal, packed with families traveling for the holidays, people hurrying to catch flights, couples arguing over luggage. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to get somewhere my family expected me to be. I was just going home. The next 6 months were the most peaceful of my adult life. I threw myself into work with renewed energy, no longer carrying the emotional weight of constant family drama. My portfolio performance hit record highs. I was promoted to senior partner. I started dating again, something I'd never had time. For when I was constantly stressed about family obligations, I never heard from Dad directly, but the family grapevine kept me informed. Marcus had blown through his latest loan and was working for a lumber company in Bend. His first real job in years, Delilah had moved back home after her influencer. Boyfriend turned out to be married. Mom had quietly started substitute teaching to help cover household expenses. Caldwell Holdings was struggling, just as the Cascade analysis had predicted. Dad had been forced to sell off several properties and lay off a third of his workforce. The business that had been his pride and joy for 30 years was slowly crumbling. I felt bad for the employees, people I'd known since childhood who were losing their livelihoods because of Dad's pride and poor decisions. But I didn't feel bad for Dad. Not anymore. In March, I got a call from my old family lawyer, David Chen, who'd handled Caldwell family business for 20 years. "Vivienne, I need to talk to you about something sensitive," he said. "It's about your father's company." "I'm not interested in a family reconciliation, David. This isn't about reconciliation. This is about opportunity. Your father is going to lose the business if he doesn't find a buyer in the next 60 days. The bank is calling in the loans." I was quiet for a moment. And there's been interest from several buyers, mostly development companies that want to clear-cut the timber holdings and build condos. Your father would lose everything. The land that's been in the family for 3 generations, the jobs of everyone who's worked for him, the environmental protections he's put in place. What does this have to do with me? "Well," David said carefully, "there's another option. A buyer who would preserve the environmental aspects, keep the local workforce, and run the operation sustainably. Someone who understands both the business and the family legacy." "Who?" "You, Vivienne. You could buy the company." I almost laughed. "David, I work in finance, not timber. You work in investments, you understand business operations, cash flow, market analysis, and you have the capital to make it work. More importantly, you're the only buyer who would preserve what your father built instead of destroying it." He'd never sell to me. He doesn't have a choice. If he doesn't accept an offer in the next 60 days, the bank will foreclose and auction everything off. At least this way, the family legacy survives. I spent 2 weeks analyzing Caldwell Holdings' financial situation. David was right. The company was salvageable, but it needed significant restructuring and an infusion of capital. More importantly, it needed management that understood modern business practices. The timber operation itself was sound. Dad had always been good at the actual work of forestry. His problem was everything else: financial management, strategic planning, adapting to market changes. All the things I'd learned at Stanford and perfected at Cascade, I could turn Caldwell Holdings into something truly special. A sustainable forestry operation that balanced environmental protection with profitability, a model for how family businesses could evolve and thrive. But first, I had to decide if I wanted to. In the end, it wasn't about dad or revenge or proving a point. It was about the 43 people who worked for Caldwell Holdings. People like Jenny Martinez, who'd been the office manager for 15 years, and Tom Bradley, who'd started as a seasonal worker and worked his way up to foreman, people who deserved better than losing their jobs because of one man's pride. I called David on a Tuesday afternoon in April. "Draw up the offer," I said. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, Dad can stay on as a consultant for environmental and operational issues, but he has no decision-making authority. Second, Marcus and Delilah get no preferential treatment. If they want jobs, they apply like everyone else and earn them. Third, the company gets renamed to Cascade Timber Holdings. Fourth, I want the deed to the Sun River Lodge as part of the deal." "The lodge?" "Why?" "Personal reasons." The meeting was held at David's office on a rainy Thursday morning. I arrived early, wearing my best Armani suit and carrying a leather portfolio with the acquisition documents. This was business, and I wanted to look the part. Dad arrived exactly on time, looking older than I remembered. 6 months of stress had aged him. His suit was slightly rumpled, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed desperation. "Vivienne," he said stiffly when he saw me. "Harrison," I replied, using his first name deliberately. David handled the preliminaries, explaining the offer terms, the timeline, the legal implications. Dad listened in silence, his face unreadable. "So let me understand this," Dad said finally. "My daughter wants to buy my company." "Your daughter wants to acquire a distressed asset at fair market value," I corrected. "This is a business transaction. And you think you can run a timber operation?" "I think I can run a business. The timber expertise I can hire." Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring at the contract spread across David's conference table. "Why?" he asked finally. "Because 43 people deserve to keep their jobs? Because 300 acres of protected forest deserve better than being turned into condos? Because sometimes the best revenge is success. So this is about revenge?" "No," I said. "This is about doing what's right. The revenge was walking away from your dinner table 6 months ago and never looking back." Dad signed the papers without another word. The transaction would close in 30 days, pending due diligence and bank approvals. Cascade Timber Holdings would officially exist, with me as CEO and majority owner. As we left David's office, Dad stopped me in the parking lot. "I know you think I'm a failure," he said quietly. "I think you're a man who let pride get in the way of good judgment," I replied. "But I also think you genuinely care about the land and the people who work it. That's why you're staying on as a consultant. What about the family? What about your mother? What about them? She misses you. We all do, in our way." I looked at this man who'd shaped my entire life, who'd pushed me to be successful while simultaneously resenting my success, who'd given me strength while trying to undermine my confidence. Missing someone and respecting them are two different things, I said. "When you figure out the difference, you know where to find me." Taking over Caldwell Holdings, now Cascade Timber Holdings, was like performing surgery on a living organism. Everything was connected, and one wrong move could kill the patient. I spent my first month visiting every job site, talking to every employee, reviewing every process. What I found was exactly what I'd expected: good people working for a company that was stuck in 1985. The equipment was outdated but functional. The environmental practices were sound but could be improved. The workforce was skilled but demoralized by years of uncertainty and layoffs. Most importantly, the land itself was spectacular. 300 acres of old-growth forest, managed sustainably for decades. Home to wildlife populations that had been carefully protected and nurtured. This wasn't just a business. It was a conservation success story that happened to generate revenue. My first major decision was to invest in new equipment and training. My second was to implement profit sharing for all employees. My third was to start a scholarship program for employees' children. Dad watched all of this from his consultant role, saying little but observing everything. I could tell he was surprised. by some of my decisions, impressed by others, and probably resentful of all of them. The Sun River Lodge had been sitting empty since I'd acquired it as part of the Caldwell Holdings purchase. For months, I'd been planning to sell it, but I could never quite bring myself to list it. Finally, on a Saturday in September, I drove. Up there alone. The lodge looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing, without the family drama and emotional baggage. It was just a nice vacation rental in the mountains. I walked through the rooms where I'd grown up feeling inadequate, where I'd been lectured and criticized and made to feel small. The dining room where I'd unveiled my disastrous gift. The driveway where I'd been humiliated in front of my entire extended family. But standing there alone, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. The lodge was just a building. The family dynamics were just patterns of behavior that I'd chosen to step away from. The pain was just a memory that no longer had power over me. I pulled out my phone and called a real estate agent. "I want to donate a property to charity," I said. "Something that could be used for family retreats or children's camps. Something that could give other families better memories than mine had here." I didn't plan to go back to Bend for Christmas. I'd made plans to spend the holidays in Maui with some friends from work, people who knew me as Vivienne, the successful businesswoman, not Vivienne, the disappointing daughter. But on December 20th, I got a call from Mom. "Vivienne, honey, your father's in the hospital." My heart stopped. What happened? "Heart attack, a mild one, the doctors say. But he's going to need surgery, and honey, he's been asking for you." I should have said no. I should have sent flowers and a card and stayed in Maui. I should have protected the peace I'd spent a year building. Instead, I canceled my vacation and drove to Bend. Dad looked small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and IVs, his usual commanding presence reduced to worried eyes and a pale complexion. "You came," he said when he saw me. Mom called. "I know. I told her not to. You have your own life now." I sat down in the visitor's chair, unsure what to say. A year ago, I would have been desperate for his approval, would have used this moment to try to rebuild our relationship. Now I was just a daughter visiting her sick father. "How are you feeling?" I asked. Old, scared. Like I've wasted a lot of time on the wrong things. We sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the beep of the heart monitor. "The company is doing well," he said finally. "I know. Better than I ever managed, you were. Right about the profit sharing, about the new equipment. The employees are happier than they've been in years. They're good people. They deserved better leadership." Dad winced, but not from physical pain. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For what specifically?" "For making you choose between my approval and your success, for treating your achievements like personal attacks on my authority, for being jealous of your strength when I should have been proud of it." I felt something shift in my chest. A tension I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. "I spent so many years trying to prove I was good enough for this family," I said. "I never realized that the problem wasn't me. The problem was never you, Vivienne. The problem was a stubborn old man who couldn't stand the idea that his daughter had grown beyond his ability to control her." We talked for 2 hours that day, not about business or money or family obligations, but about life, about dreams he'd given up, mistakes he'd made, lessons he'd learned too late, about my years of feeling invisible in my own family, my struggle to find my identity outside of his expectations. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. 32 years of hurt don't disappear with one conversation. But it was a beginning, I want you to know, Dad said as I was getting ready to leave, that when people ask me about my children now, I tell them about my daughter who saved our family business, my daughter who built something bigger than I ever dreamed of, my daughter who had the courage to walk away when she needed to and the grace to come back when it mattered. Christmas dinner that year was different. Smaller, quieter, more honest. Just immediate family around Mom's dining room table, eating her cooking instead of catered food, talking about real things instead of performing for each other. Marcus had gotten a promotion at the lumber company and was 6 months sober. Delilah had started taking business classes and was working part-time at a local art gallery. Mom had gone back to teaching full-time and loved it. The family dynamics were still complicated. 30 years of patterns don't change overnight. But the desperate need for approval, the constant competition for Dad's attention, the exhausting, emotional games, all of that was gone. I have something for everyone, I said after dinner, pulling out envelopes I'd prepared. Vivienne, we agreed on a spending limit this year, Mom said, worried. It's not money, I said. It's opportunity. I handed Marcus an envelope first. Inside was a job offer from Cascade Timber Holdings. Not a handout, but a real position as Assistant Operations Manager, contingent on completing a Forestry Management Certificate program, Delilah's envelope. Contained information about a small business loan program I'd created through the company, designed to help employees and their families start their own ventures. If she wanted to open her own gallery, she could earn the opportunity, Mom's envelope. Had information about the scholarship program I'd endowed at Oregon State University. Specifically for non-traditional students returning to education, Dad's envelope was different. It contained the deed to 10 acres of the most beautiful timberland in the Cascade Holdings, not as a gift, but as a purchase he could make with his consultant fees, a place where he could build the retirement cabin he'd always talked about. The real test came 6 months later when I was invited to speak at a sustainable business conference in Denver. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd always had to choose between in the past: family or career, success or relationships. This time I didn't have to choose. I flew to Denver on a NetJets charter, but not alone. Dad came with me, along with Tom Bradley, our head foreman, to present our case study on transforming traditional timber operations into sustainable enterprises. Watching Dad present alongside me, seeing him beam with pride as I fielded questions from Fortune 500 executives, finally experiencing what it felt like to have family support instead of family competition, it was better than any revenge I could have imagined. On the flight back to Portland, Dad looked out the window at the mountains below and said, "You know, I never understood why you walked away that Thanksgiving." "What do you understand now?" I asked. "That sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what actually matters. And sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who refuse to enable your worst behavior." 2 years after that disastrous Thanksgiving, I hosted my own family gathering, not at an expensive rental, but at my penthouse in Portland, with food I'd cooked myself and wine from Oregon vineyards I now partially owned through Cascade's diversification investments. The 67 Shelby sat in my private garage, perfectly maintained but rarely driven, not because I was trying to prove a point, but because I'd discovered I preferred my Tesla for daily driving. The Shelby had become what it was always meant to be. A beautiful reminder of a moment when everything changed. Marcus brought his girlfriend, a smart woman who worked in environmental law and didn't let him get away with his old patterns of behavior. Delilah brought photos of her gallery's first successful art show, funded through the small business loan program and thriving because she'd finally learned to combine her creativity with actual business skills. Mom and Dad arrived together, holding hands like newlyweds, their relationship stronger than it had been in years now that they were building something together instead of just maintaining old patterns. We ate dinner around my dining room table, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the Willamette River, talking about business and art and travel and dreams. Real conversation between people who respected each other, supported each other, challenged each other to be better. "I want to propose a toast," Dad said, raising his wine glass. "To my daughter Vivienne, who taught us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve." By my 35th birthday, Cascade Strategic Partners had opened a second office in Seattle, with me as Regional Managing Director, Cascade. Timber Holdings had expanded to include 3 sustainable forestry operations across the Pacific Northwest, employing over 200 people and serving as a model for environmental stewardship in the industry. I'd also quietly acquired 2 other family businesses in Oregon, companies facing the same challenges Caldwell Holdings had faced, run by stubborn founders who couldn't adapt to changing markets. In each case, I'd restructured the operations, modernized the management, and preserved both jobs and family legacies. The financial press had started calling me the family business whisperer, a nickname that amused me considering how spectacularly I'd failed to communicate with my own family. For so many years, but the real measure of success wasn't in the headlines or the portfolio performance or the awards on my office wall. It was in the phone calls from Dad asking for business advice, in the family dinners where I felt truly welcome, in the knowledge that I'd built something that mattered without sacrificing who I was. This year's Thanksgiving was held at the Sun River Lodge, not the one from my family's past, but a new one I'd purchased and renovated as a family retreat. Center, the old lodge, the scene of my humiliation, had been transformed into a summer camp for underprivileged kids from Portland. Our new tradition was different. Instead of expensive catered meals and performative gift-giving, we spent the morning volunteering at the local food bank, the afternoon hiking in the forest, and the evening cooking together and sharing stories. The family had expanded too. Marcus's girlfriend had become his fiancée. Delilah was dating a sustainable architect who designed eco-friendly buildings. I'd been seeing someone too, a fellow Stanford alum who ran a clean energy startup and understood the demands of building something meaningful. As we sat around the fire that evening, I realized that this was what I'd been searching for all those years. Not my father's approval or my family's acceptance, but genuine connection based on mutual respect and shared values. I have an announcement, I said, standing up with my wine glass. Next year, I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations at Cascade Strategic. I'm starting a foundation focused on helping family businesses transition to sustainable practices while preserving family legacies. The room erupted in excited questions and congratulations. What will you call it? Mom asked. I smiled, thinking of all the journeys that had led to this moment. The failures and successes, the heartbreak and healing, the long path from seeking approval to finding purpose. The Second Generation Foundation, I said. Because sometimes the best way to honor your family's legacy is to build something better than what came before. As I write this, I'm somewhere over the Colorado Rockies in my own private jet. Not a NetJets charter, but a Gulfstream G650 that I purchased last year when the foundation's work started requiring constant travel. I'm heading to a conference in Austin where I'll be speaking about sustainable business practices and family dynamics. Dad is flying commercial to meet me there, not because he can't afford first class, but because he enjoys talking to strangers about his daughter's work. The irony isn't lost on me 5 years ago. I was desperately trying to buy my father's love with an expensive car he didn't want. Today, I fly private jets to conferences where I'm the keynote speaker, and he brags about me to anyone who will listen. The difference isn't in the success or the money or the recognition. The difference is that I stopped trying to be the daughter he wanted and started being the woman I was meant to become. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes the most powerful revenge is walking away, but sometimes the most powerful healing is coming back on your own terms, with your own strength, ready to build something better than what existed before. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your truth in the comments. Because sometimes justice whispers and still echoes forever. The pilot just announced our descent into Austin. Time to go change another family's story. One business at a time.